So today is Sunday, January 29th. I'm about 8 weeks away from the first round judging of National Homebrew Con in Philadelphia. That's where I plan to send my entries. I need to brew some beer. So today I have a busy brew day planned. I'm planning to brew an English porter. I'm planning to brew another batch of my American porter. And then I also need to keg some beer, so I have room in my fermenters. Well, that sounds like a pretty busy day. Let's get to it. So backing up a couple days, I saved some Imperial Pub yeast from a prior ordinary bitter batch. To ensure the yeast is viable and healthy, I added some to a ½ liter starter. Come brew day, I'm pretty happy with the amount of activity and the amount of yeast that I see in the starter. I had some dry yeast as a backup, but I was curious to give Imperial Pub a try in my English porter. Most of my prior batches used White Labs WLP013 London Ale. Well, thanks for stopping by Cascades Homebrew. My name is Brent. Today we're brewing some beer. As I mentioned, I got a pretty busy day going today. We're about 8 weeks away from the entries for National Homebrew Con need to be judged. I've got 3 beers at least that I want to brew. So today I'm brewing an English porter, which I have going now. I'm going to try to do a double batch and do an American porter afterwards. Additionally, I have a hazy IPA made with Helio Gazer that's in my fermenters right now. I need to keg that because I need to use those fermenters for the beer I'm brewing today. And then in order to free up some keg space for that Helio Gazer IPA, I bottled off some of the last of a Saison, my collaboration, Matt from Jagger's Brewing Company. Then I also finished off the last of a New England IPA. I thought I might have enough to bottle a few off, but I didn't, so that's cool. I had to clean those kegs and prep them. I also had a hop water in a 5-gallon keg. I didn't have enough CO2 hookups to have it on tap anyways, and it was getting pretty bad. I think I just used way too much hops, so I dumped that one, cleaned that keg. So I've been busy prepping, cleaning. I got my recipes all ready for my American porter and my English porter. They're basically versions of prior recipes that I made a couple tweaks. So far, I went ahead and I prepped my water. I measured out the amount that I needed. Then I added in some salts. So I'm glad I have my checklist because I almost forgot to add the baking soda. So this English porter, I found a little bit of baking soda will help boost the pH up. It's got a lot of crystal, brown malt, and then some chocolate malt that drive the pH down, so that baking soda will help keep me up in a good range. Additionally, I weighed up my grain and measured it. So this recipe has about 76% of a Maris Otter Pale Ale malt. It's got about 9.5% of both a brown malt, which is about 65 level bond. Then I used an 80 level bond crystal malt, again at that 9.5%. And then I have chocolate malt, 5.3% of the recipe. So I measured those out, milled them. So right now the mash is started and I need to get busy kegging that beer so I have a fermenter ready. So I already put out a video on this batch, but I brewed a 5-gallon batch of a hazy IPA. The yeast with a thiol boosting strain from a mega named Helio Gazer. Half of the batch got phantasm powder added to the fermenter. Well, I was able to get one of the fermenters kegged before I got to get back to my English porter. At the end of the 60-minute mash, I moved the English porter pot over to my sink where I remove and drain the grain bag. Just before the wort comes up to a boil, I added my first hop charge. That's about 1/4 ounce or 7 grams of Warrior for the 30-minute boil to give about 20 IBUs. Then with 15 minutes left in the boil, I add in ½ an ounce or 14 grams of East Kent Goldings to give about 10 IBUs and also half of a Werflock tablet. During breaks in the boil, I was able to keg my other fermenter of Helio Gazer IPA. This is the half batch that got the phantasm powder. Then, at the end of the 30-minute boil, I chilled the wort down to pitching temperatures using my immersion chiller and a small pump. So right now, it looks like we're about 3.5 hours into the brew day. So I got the English porter, I just chilled it down, it's ready to go in a fermenter. The problem, my fermenters still look like this. So I also got the Helio Gazer IPA kegged. So I usually figure on a brew day like this, I've got a 60-minute mash, 30-minute boil, I usually have about 45 minutes of sort of a free time in there, in the mash and the boil to kind of get other things done. Well, I usually figure it takes probably about an hour or so to keg 2 of these small 2.5-gallon batches of beer. So that means I'm a 15-minute deficit, which probably feels about right. I also felt like I was kind of running up and down the stairs, getting my sanitizer from upstairs, from downstairs, getting the, moving my camera around so I could film a little bit. I also found I was kind of short on buckets at time. I have a bunch of extra buckets around here, but they work well for my standard brew day, but I kind of find a bucket was full. Maybe I needed to run downstairs or run upstairs to move around another bucket. So I'm going to go ahead, get both of these fermenters nice and cleaned up, sanitized, and I'm going to transfer my English porter into one of the kegs and take a break for a second maybe and get the other batch going. With my fermenter nice and clean and also sanitized with Star San, I transfer the chilled wort into the fermenter. It looks like I'm right on track with about 2.7 gallons of wort. I then pitch my 500 milliliter starter of Imperial Pub A07 yeast. As I mentioned, this was harvested from a prior batch of an ordinary bitter. I measure a gravity of 1050, which is right on track with my 1049 target. Brew an English porter, check. Keg a Helio Gazer IPA, check. I think I underestimated how much cleaning would be involved. Also kind of the running up and down the stairs, moving the camera around, getting stuff from upstairs and down. It was a little bit tiring, but I've got one more beer to brew. So now it's time to brew my next batch. This one is an American porter. This is my third in the series of my Road to Goad series that I'm brewing. The first one turned out pretty good. I made some tweaks to the second one, and that's in the keg right now. It's actually pretty good, maybe a little bit too much of the kind of dark chocolatey vibe to it. So this one, I'm just making a couple minor tweaks, and hopefully it'll turn out really nice. So if you're interested in the recipe for my American porter or my English porter, I'll go ahead and put the links down in the description. There you can check out the details. But right now, I need to get brewing. So if you paid attention, this routine might look familiar. So again, this was another batch targeting 2.5 gallons or 9.5 liters of finished beer. To get that, I figure I need around 2.7 gallons or 10.2 liters into the fermenter. So I started out measuring out my needed water. To my tap water, I had 1 gram of gypsum, 1 gram of calcium chloride, and half a tablet of camblin. Now, I'm not doing any pH adjustments, but I probably could have used some baking soda to help raise the pH. I did measure a pH of a 5.2, where a pH around 5.4 or maybe 5.5 would be ideal for this style. With the water heating up, it's time to measure out my grain bill. The grain bill for this one, might be a little bit more complex than it needs to be, but I do think every grain has a purpose. The core malt is 71.5%, 2-row pale malt, and then there's 10.6% of Munich malt. Then I've got several malts from Murphy and Rood Maltster. They're a craft maltster here in Virginia, so I'm using 8.1% of their Crystal 80. And then I've got 3.3% of 3 of their dark malts. One's called a milk chocolate malt, which is 270 level bond, kind of like a pale chocolate. Then there's another 3.3% of their baker's chocolate, which is just a dark chocolate malt. That's 425 level bond. And then there's another 3.3% of a chocolate wheat, which is 290 level bond. So if you don't have access to Murphy and Rood malts, but you want to brew something similar, like I say, the milk chocolate is probably look for a pale chocolate malt. The baker's chocolate, kind of just a darker version of a chocolate malt. And then just look for a chocolate wheat, and somewhere in the level bond should be fine. With the grains all measured out and milled, and the water up to strike temperature, it's time to get the mash going. Target for this one is a 60-minute mash at 154 degrees Fahrenheit, or 67.8 degrees Celsius. With the end of the mash, I move my pot back over to the sink, and again, I do remove the grain bag, giving it a good squeeze and letting it drain, trying to get out as much of the sugars as I can. At the start of the 30-minute boil, I add a 1/4 ounce or 7 grams of Warrior to give just over 17 IBUs. With 15 minutes left in the boil, I add half of a Werflock tablet. And then, with 5 minutes to go, I add 2 ounces or 27 grams of Willamette hops. That calculates about around 21 IBUs. So that's a step up from my last batch. I thought I wanted a little bit more hop punch in it, so 2 ounces, 5 minutes left, that's a pretty good chunk of hops for a 2.5 gallon batch. After the 30-minute boil, I chill the wort down to my pitching temperatures, and then transfer the chilled wort into my sanitized fermenter. This one had a good amount of hop debris filtered out from the strainer. So probably due to some of the losses to hops I did not account for, I came in just under my target of 2.7 gallons. For yeast, this batch got a full pack of US-05 dry yeast. I direct pitched the yeast by sprinkling it into the chilled wort. I measured a gravity of 1062, which again was just right on my target of 1061. Both batches then went into my fermentation chamber. So that was a long brew day. It was about 5 hours earlier, and then I think 3.5. I'm probably be 4 hours before I'm all cleaned up. But I got 2 beers brewed, an American porter and an English porter. They're in the fermenters behind me. I'm hoping that those will be my entries for National Homebrew Con. I got about 8 weeks to get them ready for tasting, about 5 to 6 weeks before I need to ship them. I also have a double fermenting over here. That's one of my entries. I'm hoping to brew an American IPA. I also have a Saison that I may use as a backup. So it'll be a couple months before I hear my results. I'll probably cycle back then, let you know how I did in National Homebrew Con, how these specific beers did, how I'm doing with my road to gold on the American porter. So if you're interested in the recipes, be sure to check the links below in the description. If you're interested to see how I do, or to see other interesting videos of how I brew beer, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Click like, and cheers!